When it comes to the European Union taking action against Israeli policy, nothing happens quickly, if at all. Well, is that about to change? EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says that a majority of member countries have called for a ban on the import of products from Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, several member states, including Ireland, the Netherlands, and Spain, have already imposed their own trade restrictions. Pressure is growing for the European Union to act as a whole. And that was evident today as EU foreign ministers met in Brussels.
These are not options against Israel. These are options against the illegal settlements that undermine the two-state solution. Taking action against the trade with settlements got the most support from the member states. We tasked the ambassadors to take this work forward, and probably will also have an extraordinary meeting on this.
Well, my next guest is warning that Europe could be exposing itself to legal liability the longer it waits to take action on trade with Israeli settlements that Europe considers to be a violation of international law. Alberto Alemanno is a professor of EU law at HEC Paris. Professor, it's good to have you with us. I know you say that every day Europe drags its feet, that its legal liability grows. Are you saying that Europe could possibly be seen not merely as a bystander here, but as an accomplice in alleged criminal acts by Israel?
I think this is a long-standing issue. The European Union has been importing goods, also services from Israel over the past few decades. And since then, we have an advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice clearly declaring those settlements illegal. That alone signified that the continuation of trade relations with Israel, and in particular those territories, represent a breach of international law. That alone would justify action by the European Union. And that's why the hesitation we are facing today when foreign affairs ministries are meeting and discussing these issues seems to be slightly problematic, because the EU should have acted much earlier than today.
But Professor, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and you're saying that the optics here are not good, and the legal liability, that point is taken. But who would or could judge the EU? I mean, who's going to point the finger at the EU and demand that it change its course of action?
Well, that's a matter of inaction by the European Union. And since this is a trade issue, it's an issue that only the European Union alone can actually decide by majority vote of its own members. Its inability to act is something that could be brought in by a member state, meaning a national government could bring decision for failure to act before the Court of Justice, and potentially also by civil society organization and citizens. They can bring decision before national courts, invoking both public international law and European law, and then having the national court referring the matter to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which potentially could condemn the EU for inaction.
But this would not happen quickly, would it? I mean, there may be legal recourse here, but we're talking about, what, months, years? And by then, maybe the public will have forgotten about the whole thing.
Well, I doubt that public opinion will forget about this, but certainly it's going to take time before a judgment of the court will be given on the issue. I think the legal threats and their existence suggest that the pressure is mounting now on many governments, notably the few governments who have been holding back. We know which governments are against the idea of taking some measures against Israel, all the more so because of the difficult relationship with the US, the European Union entertains, NATO implications, and also because there will be elections in Israel. So how these possible restrictions taken by the EU might come across in Israel is also questioned today. Will this further radicalize the most radical parties in those elections? I think all those are genuine concerns, but at the same time, they don't provide an alibi for European inaction today.
Yeah, the European Union moving at what you say is a tectonic pace on this trade ban. Is it moving so slowly on purpose, in your opinion? And am I understanding you correctly? Do you think that the leaders in Brussels are actually considering the election in Israel when they're making their decisions here? I mean, that's domestic issues of Israel. That shouldn't be playing a role in European Union policy decisions, should it?
Well, legally speaking, this is a matter of trade where a simple majority of member states could agree on. But we know that some countries, including the Italian government, the Czech government, but also Germany, insist on saying, no, this is a matter of foreign policy, though we need unanimity. And since there's no unanimity, we cannot really act. So in a way, they're hiding behind this legal argument to potentially hide deeper variables, including the electoral dimension in Israel, the relationship the EU has with the United States. So all of this is kind of mixed together in order to delay action. However, it's the first time ever that an actual discussion is taking place about actually restricting trade, because the original idea of suspending the entire EU-Israel trade partnership was actually set aside, but now is back on the agenda by looking specifically to the issue of trade with the illegal settlements that exist in the West Bank, for instance. So this per se seems to matter a lot, but these are mere options. They are not proposals. So we don't see legislative proposals on the table yet, despite the growing demand by a dozen of member states that seem to have today a majority to actually pass those measures.
The International Court of Justice has said that states should take steps to prevent trade and investment that help maintain the occupation. Now, if the law is already clear, why is the EU still debating options instead of implementing them? I mean, outsiders are going to look at this and say this is another example of the EU is ineffective. The only thing it does well is just talk.
Well, the enforcement of public international law is clearly under stress today. So there are not many precedents in which other countries have been, lodging actions against other countries because of the breach of international law, all the more so when it comes to Israel. We know this remains politically and historically an issue that is holding back many countries, notably Germany. We know that South Africa took this stance a few months ago to bring these actions against Israel itself, and that's the origin of that opinion. So in a way, the entire enforcement remains quite underdeveloped, and this is the reason why the law is not so clear. And oftentimes, the law is used in order to chill action, political action, by saying, we're not so sure that actually if we do this, it's going to go through. And this, I think, is a very abusive way of using the law in order to chill, to threaten people from acting.
Professor, many viewers are going to look at this and say, Brussels is willing to sanction Russia over invading Ukraine, and it's willing to do it quickly. Why isn't it as willing to act as quickly and as effectively against Israel? I mean, are there two standards of international law here?
It's an easy argument to make, but I'm not sure that he holds all the way. I think the current situation we've been witnessing in the past couple of years in Israel, following the Hamas attack and the, let's say, reaction, has no precedent. And it also has a much deeper and longer story in which the European Union never managed to speak with one voice. And I think that's a major difference. I think the European member states, national governments are completely split on the issue. Whereas when it comes to Ukraine, we don't know exactly why and how. There seems to be much greater unanimity, and all the more so that Viktor Orban, who was possibly the only rebellious head of state, head of government in that case, was kind of holding back. So the two situations are quite different. I don't necessarily buy this kind of double standard argument. I think the situation is much more clear-cut when it comes to Israel than many people depict. So here, I think the EU should basically take action in order to remain consistent with his own value system and what he preaches.
If and when the EU does take action, what we've been hearing is that we may not be talking about a total trade ban. Now, critics say that anything less than a total ban will be nothing but performative politics. Do you agree?
Obviously, the entire idea of banning or limiting or restricting trade coming from the Israeli illegal settlement to the union is merely symbolic. We're talking about a very small amount of trade that is currently happening between these territories and the union, but it has a very significant political symbolic value in the relationship between the EU and Israel, which would have a very significant political effects both across the union and in the Israeli political system. So I think it would be important also as a precedent for many other regions of the world. They are looking at the European Union, and therefore the EU remains a little bit of a test case for taking international law obligations seriously or not.
Professor, let me ask you before we run out of time, if governments can set aside legal obligations whenever the geopolitical stakes are high, doesn't that empty international law of any real meaning?
There's no doubt what is at stake is the credibility of the entire international law system as it emerged after the Second World War, as it has been promoted, notably the United States of America and Europe and the European countries. And therefore, the question is what is left of that system? If there is cherry picking, if there is kind of this political chill on whether to enforce it or not. And since we are getting into a new geopolitical order where we are no longer seeing is a value-based multilateral order, obviously any departure from these obligations represent negative precedent that weaken even further the potential sustainability of the systems in the absence of an alternative.
Professor Alberto Alemanno, we appreciate your time, valuable insights, fascinating discussion. Thank you.